You know, when we think about history, we usually picture dusty old scrolls, right? Faded ink on fragile paper. But what if I told you some of the most epic stories, tales of clashing empires and gigantic battles, weren't written down, but were actually carved into solid rock? They've been waiting for centuries just for us to come along and read them. So let's get our hands dirty, so to speak, and find out what these ancient stones have to tell us.
I mean, think about it. How on earth do we really know what happened in a battle almost 3,000 years ago? Accounts get lost, stories get twisted over time, right? Well, for one absolutely colossal battle back in 853 BCE, we have something truly incredible. We have witnesses. And no, not people, but giant stone monuments. And the amazing part? They preserve the story from two very different sides of the fight.
So, in one corner, you've got the official war diary of a conquering emperor. That's the Kurkh Stele. And in the other corner, you have the victory monument of a rebel king, the Mesha Stele. It's like having two key witnesses to the same event. And when you put their stories together, wow. You get this stunningly clear picture of a world on the absolute brink. All right, so before we dive into the battle itself, we've got to set the stage. We need to understand the world this all went down in. We're talking about the 9th century BCE. It was a time of massive change, rising empires, shaky alliances, and there was one empire that was rising faster and, frankly, more brutally than anyone else, the Assyrian Empire. So, during this exact period, you've got these two major powers, basically on a collision course. On one hand, you have the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Under kings like Ashurnasirpal II and then his son, Shalmaneser III, they're just pushing west, relentlessly conquering everything. At the very same time, the Kingdom of Israel is having its own moment. It's coming out of a nasty civil war, and it gets unified and becomes super powerful under a new king, Omri, and then his son, Ahab. And they build a dynasty that was so influential, its name would echo for generations. And if you're wondering just how big a deal these guys were, get this. Even the Assyrians, their number one enemy, called the entire Kingdom of Israel the House of Omri. And they kept calling it that for over 100 years, long after Omri's actual family was totally gone. I mean, that's like calling modern-day France the House of Napoleon. It just goes to show you the kind of power and prestige this dynasty had built up. It really left a mark.
Okay, so you've got this Assyrian war machine, and it seems totally unstoppable. King Shalmaneser is marching west, just rolling over cities, demanding tribute. And if you're one of the smaller kingdoms in his path, you've got a really simple choice. You either bend the knee or you get crushed. It was this overwhelming threat that led to one of the most unlikely and, frankly, remarkable alliances in all of ancient history. Now, you have to understand, for years and years, the kingdoms of Israel and Aram Damascus were bitter enemies. I mean, they were constantly at war, fighting over land, over influence. But now, with the Assyrian army basically knocking on their door, they had this sudden realization. The only way either of them was going to survive was to team up. It's that classic saying, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
And it wasn't just those two either. No way. They put together this huge coalition, a total of 12 kings, all banding together. You had King Hadadezer of Damascus kind of leading the charge. You had King Irhulini of Hamath, and of course, a major player in all this, King Ahab of Israel. Together, they gathered their forces to make a stand against this Assyrian superpower. So, the stage was set. The year is 853 BCE. The location, a place called Qarqar in what's now Syria. And this is where the two massive armies finally met. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was it. This was the battle that would decide the fate of the entire region. And when you look at the numbers the coalition brought to the table, it's just breathtaking. We're talking about almost 4,000 chariots, thousands of cavalry, and more than 60,000 foot soldiers. This was one of the biggest armies the ancient world had ever seen up to that point. But look closely at those numbers on the screen. There's one detail in there that really jumps out. Check that out. King Ahab of Israel, his contribution was absolutely staggering. He brought 2,000 chariots to this fight. Now, to put that in perspective, that's more than Hadadezer, the guy who was leading the coalition. It's almost as many as all the other kings put together. This tells you that Israel wasn't some minor player here. They were a military heavyweight, a core pillar of this entire alliance. So, the big question is, what happened? Who won the battle? Well, if you read the Assyrian king's account, he claims this glorious, smashing victory. He says he slaughtered 14,000 enemy soldiers. But there's always a catch with these things, isn't there? Assyrian royal records were basically propaganda. They never talked about their own losses. And here's the real kicker. After this supposed great victory, Shalmaneser just turned his army around and went home. And he didn't come back for years. That doesn't really sound like a decisive win, does it? So how in the world do we know all these incredible details? The names of the kings, the size of their armies, that specific number of 2,000 chariots? Well, it all comes back to our silent witnesses. The whole story is right there, etched into stone.
Okay, so first up, this is the Kurkh Stele. Think of it as King Shalmaneser's official record of his reign, his greatest hits album, carved in stone. It's this massive monument they found in what is now Turkey, and on it he brags about all his accomplishments, all his conquests, and, you guessed it, his version of the Battle of Qarqar. It's the victor's story, right? Full of bravado.
And right there, carved in that ancient cuneiform script, is the smoking gun. Shalmaneser himself names his enemy. He writes, Ahab the Israelite, and he confirms the exact number of troops Ahab brought to the battle. This is what's so incredible. It's not just a story you read about. This is a historical event, recorded by one of the main combatants. And it is the very first time a king from Israel or Judah is ever mentioned in any source outside of the Bible. A huge moment for historians.
Okay, so what about our second witness, the Mesha Stele? Now, this monument, which was put up by the king of Moab, it doesn't actually mention the Battle of Qarqar, but it does something just as important. It's basically a long story about his rebellion against the house of Omri, and he's complaining about how they had dominated his people for decades. So what it does is it confirms that Omri's dynasty, Ahab's family, was a major regional power. They were wealthy, they were strong, they controlled their neighbors. And that makes the idea of Ahab showing up with 2,000 chariots not just possible, but completely plausible. It all fits together.
So, why does any of this matter? I mean, why are we getting so excited about a couple of old rocks? Well, the reason is simple, but it's profound. It's because these stones connect these ancient stories to real, tangible, verifiable history. What these artifacts do is they provide outside proof. They act as external verification. They take a figure like King Ahab out of the pages of just religious texts and plant him firmly in the historical record. He wasn't just a character in a story, he was a real person who ruled a powerful nation. These stones show us that the political world we read about was absolutely real, with these complex alliances and huge international conflicts. In the end, the stone confirms the story. When you put it all together, the Kurkh Stele and the Mesha Stele give us this one breathtakingly clear snapshot of a single moment in time, almost 3,000 years ago. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other stories, how many other forgotten kings and epic battles are still out there, buried beneath the sand, just waiting to be discovered?